Greetings, Dr. Joseph Martin. Science and the Quest for Truth. This is part one of two parts, second part to follow very soon. What is science? Science is the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure, function, and behavior of the physical and natural world based on observation and experimentation. Well, I'd like to suggest, in fact, that is the way it is practiced now at university and in research labs and companies worldwide. But it does need to change. It needs to grow up and it needs to enlarge to encompass more of human nature and the universe and nature itself, including other ways of knowing science. Now, obviously, in that definition I just gave you, intellect was the only one way of knowing. So this is the logic, this is the analytical side. It's only the left brain, so it's half of the brain and the other half is missing. The other three wheels to the car of science are intuition. Knowledge comes through intuition. All the great breakthroughs in science, and this is an all, 100%, came through intuition, dreams, and visions, including Einstein's great equation on E equals mc squared. Many, many more. The carbon 6-cycle ring that we know in every science. So intuition, and the second is intuition. The third is feeling and emotion. You can know things through feeling and emotion. They just feel right. And fourthly, sensation, or the gut feeling in your body of the truth of something in terms of a particular scientific quest. Now, I seem to be eminently qualified to speak to this because I am a scientist in all the sciences, in fact, from 1969 through till 1988, so that's 19 years. I was at the University of Toronto, which is Canada's biggest and supposedly greatest university of the country. During that time, I started with physics, chemistry, inorganic, organic chemistry, biochemistry, microbiology, immunology, all these things. And I have degrees in that as well as in the biological, zoological sciences, and some studies in botany, and then also degrees in anthropology, a couple of degrees in philosophy, and of course many degrees in psychology. So I span from physics to chemistry to the social sciences, the humanities, philosophy, and also the creative arts like art, painting, architecture, and music. And of course cosmology and mythology, which you probably have found out by now through my interest. Now, in the second video, I'll talk about why it was important that I was studying at that time and the changes that I saw for the worse during that time in terms of how science was taught and what sciences were taught and where the funding came from. Nevertheless, let's look into this now. Now, science and the quest for truth is an interesting thing because most scientists today, when they go into molecular genetics or anything to do with biology or cancer research and so on, they're missing out on the most important aspects of what needs to be happening in science, because science actually is based on philosophy. And if you don't know the philosophy by which you are studying and observing and making experimental recommendations or even supposed truths, then you're really not aware of how science is or how science works, or in fact what the universe is. So science needs to have its own study of philosophy, which is why I did a degree in master's in the history and philosophy of science and technology, medicine, and psychiatry there at IHPST at university. Now, so philosophy has two main wings to start with at the very top of the philosophical pyramid. One is ontology, which is what is the nature of reality? And we study in philosophy the the reality of the universe, the reality of the cosmos and galaxies, the reality of Earth, and all of nature on Earth. The other main wing of philosophy is what we call epistemology. And epistemology is the theories of knowledge of how we know what we know. And people need to look at how we know what we know. How are you looking at it? Is it only your intellect, or are there three other ways that we supposedly can know things? And I'm suggesting, of course, that there are three other ways. You will not get taught this in science courses anywhere in the universities of the world, unless you're in some more transpersonal universities in California. Now, metaphysics, of course, is based on physics. Metaphysics is the higher level, the higher kind of overarching awareness of what physics is all about. So metaphysics is commonly known as spiritual science. And you can find things online, and there are some training courses around that in the world. But metaphysics is an ancient yogic science, and it is like 8,000, 10,000 years old, from the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Puranas, and many other things as well that we learn when we study and train in yoga and meditation. Now, let's just look at this, because this is quite important. These ancient sciences from India, and we will also include that in the Buddhist tradition of ancient and more modern science, they have been around for a long time, so they're time-tested and they're well proven. They have results in terms of medicine, healing, mind consciousness, focus, willpower, the development, all the 8 parts of the human nature to develop a one-pointed focus and a clarity and a purity of mind, heart, and body and spirit. These are the 8 rungs of the ladder in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Now, scientists in the world today, and it can be in any culture, the East and the West and the native peoples, you don't learn these things. You don't even know there is an ancient science and that it's been done before. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Western science, which is the science that prevails now in the 20th century and the 21st century, is actually really only a tiny baby. And it really is just learning to think and learning to get beyond the diaper stage. And, this is important recognition in the history of science. All the modern sciences are actually based historically on earlier sciences. For instance, alchemy, which has been around for thousands of years in the Arab world and in the Jewish world and in the European and the monastic medieval world, is based on lots of knowledge and information and practice in the realm of alchemy and healing and medicine. So alchemy grew in the 18th century, 19th century into chemistry, and then later biochemistry and so on. And the same astrology, which is in every ancient culture known to humanity, later became only very recently, when we had telescopes in the last 200 or 300 years, in terms of astronomy. And all the ancient healing techniques that involved herbs and energy work and medicine and so on, and a lot of the knowledge of spirituality, metaphysics, and even the experience of working with spirits, and I do mean elemental spirits and other ancient disembodied spirits that were human once, and also other energy spirit beings that do exist on planet Earth and in the universe. This gave rise over time through the monastic period in medieval Europe and with the monks and so on, the Arab world again, and the Jewish world, and the First Nations of Africa, the First Nations of all the 3 Americas, and Siberia and Australia, New Guinea, New Zealand, on and on and on. This ancient wisdom of healing medicine traditions through the use of spirits and spirituality is now become Western medicine. Now, I'm trying to suggest that we need both. That it's not either or, it's both and this is very important because I am a scientist and I've been studying, training, researching, writing, and teaching at 3 Canadian universities for most of my life until 1988 when I started many of my own academies to train people in a more holistic way. Having said that, then, we need to ask the question, well, how is it in this so-called intelligent civilization, modern civilization, that all this ancient wisdom and knowledge has been left behind? Because in fact, I know that when you talk about this at a university level or in classes, that it's called superstition, it's fantasy, it's non-reality. This is just, the word I'm looking for is nonsense, I suppose. Nothing can be farther from the truth. And so the fact that there's this narrow-mindedness in science and in scientific training and among certain scientists suggests that we need to look underneath all this to see how this is and why this is. Now, in a previous video, I talked about Thomas S. Kuhn, the philosopher and historian of science, a man that I met a couple of times early in my career. And he wrote the book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which is a book I would say adamantly that every scientist needs to read so they don't make science into a sacred cow. In this historical study and philosophical study, Kuhn shows that in the history of scientific revolutions or changes, that there's always a backward retention of holding on to the old theory that doesn't even seem to fit the facts or observation or even experimentation. There are anomalies that come up. This is a word we use in science. Anomalies that come up that the present theory of science does not fit, does not hold, and does not make sense of. So we need a more larger, more all-inclusive meta-theory to bring together an awareness and awakening of what the higher capacity of knowing what is really going on with nature in the universe and on Earth and among humans. Not to mention the fact that most scientists don't realize until Heisenberg's principle that we have a subjective biased view as scientists towards what we're observing, and we're narrow-minded and blinkered because we're not taking into effect our own subjective narrow-mindedness and lack of training and in other fields. So, in the history we know that, Newton, for instance, who's the father of mathematics, Mathematica Principia, and also physics and gravity and so many things. If the people at Oxford and Cambridge knew that Newton was a mystic and writing all these amazing things about the mystical realities of the universe, they probably would have dismissed him and he would have been a wandering mendicant and never teaching at any university again. But we have all the documents now in the Newton files worldwide and stored and for everyone to look at who is interested. Same with Galileo, with his awareness of changing the whole notion of the sun and the moon and the earth and how they revolve and so on. He was castigated and excommunicated from the church and almost, in fact, murdered for it or killed. And we have many other examples, but these are just a few. So now I'd like to suggest then that the reigning theory of science even today in the 21st century is not obviously optimal, nor is it the final theory that we'll be using 10, 50, 100 years from now. Science in the Western world, which is now everywhere, China, Russia, India, all the countries of the world, is still a baby and still in diapers and still not knowing how to clean itself, not really conscious of itself, not self-reflective enough to understand what science really could be if things were changed and more open-minded. Now, why is it that people scientists, in fact, or the study of science, is like this? Well, it's based on three things that I've observed and experimented when I communicated with scientists who hold to the reigning theory of materiality, physicality, and that's about it. And it's based on the three things that actually the Buddha talked about: ignorance, fear, and pride, or ego. Ignorance, fear, and pride. Ignorance of other cultures, other traditions, both ancient and modern, ignorance of metaphysics, ignorance of philosophy, ignorance of cosmology, ignorance of mythology, ignorance of spiritual traditions and mysticism and religion, ignorance of humanities, creative arts, liberal arts, all of these things, because you're not required to study these if you go directly into a science program at college or university. So this ignorance is so narrow-minded, it really is quite, in a way, I'd say, useless. You're drilling down into one very specific area of life when all around you, everything else is requesting that you look into the bigger picture and understand that it's almost becoming irrelevant if you just drill down into one small thing because the whole bigger picture is changing. For instance, we now think that and accept that DNA is what creates the human being and makes changes in our nature as we grow and as we reproduce. There is a theory now that suggests that no, it's not based on that. It's based on spontaneous evolution that has to do with behaviors, consciousness, and activities that can actually change the telomeres on the genes. Now, that's just one example. There are dozens of others in every realm of science to show that we are needing to change our belief system, our religion of science right now, into something far more capacitative in terms of awareness, awakening, and knowledge and understanding, because it's all about understanding and the practicality, which will come in part 2 of this video. So, to lack curiosity and to lack a larger mindset of consciousness about all the other sciences and about other ancient cultures is really inadmissibly wrong or dastardly kind of damaging to the training we give our young students in public school, high school, colleges, and universities, because they need to know this knowledge, which is why we're putting out these videos, and there's lots of other videos on these topics, hopefully, for you to watch and visit. Now, this lack of cross-cultural and historical training, I think, has been the basis of my life, and hopefully it will be a place where you can learn and put together some of these ideas, what I'm offering you, and I will be putting together an e-university online to avail yourselves of going through the different steps that I went through and take it farther than I've gone myself. Because I'm relying on the new minds, the new hearts, the unified whole people of the world, particularly you young millennials around the world, to go much farther than I have. This is just my offering and service to you. Now, I'd like to say, because the title is about science and the quest for truth, that there is an absolute truth. There is an absolute truth. I've studied it, I've felt it, I feel it in my heart, I intuit it, I know it in that way. You can too, many of you who do your yoga and meditation and your intuitive higher metaphysical studies know that there is this. And the heart is the one way of knowing that combines all the other ways of knowing. The heart is a unifying, holistic principle. It's a source unto itself. The source of the universe is in you. And this unified source of absolute truth makes sense because all the pieces fit together, and it's an ever-expanding kind of awareness of superconsciousness and knowledge. But everything does fit into this biggest, infinite, ever-expanding field or picture or science. And it is a superconsciousness, and that's where the human species is evolving. So I'm counting on you listening to engage in the superconscious journey and adventure for the absolute truth. You might be told in terms of some of the sciences that you study, that things are relative and they're always changing. Well, from a human perspective, that may be so because change is normal and change is the way of the universe. However, from the top down, and humans are way down the scale of cosmological beings, although we have a lot of divinity within ourselves, from the top down, there is an absolute truth of how universes come and go and how the truth of all knowledge comes and goes. And so that's what I'm trying to suggest here. Stay tuned for part 2 as coming next. And anyways, all my love and blessings to you, Dr. Joseph Martin.